Hello, everyone. My name is Rishika Porandla, and I'm the founder and director of Spacetime Archives, which is an educational outreach nonprofit aiming to provide unique STEM learning opportunities to underserved youth, especially in our little niche of astronomy and aerospace education. Spacetime Archives runs a project called And Then There Were 10, the testimonies of 10 women fighting for educational equity, which is an interview series highlighting the untold stories of 10 extraordinary women who are at the forefront of educational equity. On that note, let me introduce one of those women, Sally Chen. Sally Chen is the Education Equity Policy Manager at Chinese for Affirmative Action, and her principles are advocating for universal, no-cost, and racially diverse K through 16 education for all students. Before her current position, she managed a job center for Chinese immigrants and advocated for affirmative action policies and local hiring. In all, she advocates for racial justice issues, equity issues, and is trying to make education a better environment for all races, genders, and minorities. So I'll let Sally get into a little introduction for herself.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and really nice to meet you, Rishika. The bio you shared is pretty comprehensive. I'll add on just that Chinese for Affirmative Action is a nonprofit based in San Francisco. It is a over 50-plus-year-old civil rights organization with a long history in the Bay Area, advocating for the civil rights of Chinese Americans and being a progressive voice on behalf of and within the broader Asian American community. And for myself, I was born and raised in San Francisco and very much am happy to be back with the communities that I grew up with and to be a part of both the direct services, civic engagement, and advocacy that CAA is known for and is still working on after all these years within these communities too.
So as our first question, a student wanted to learn a little bit more about you and how your experiences have driven what you did in your future. So could you share an anecdote from your childhood about advocating and translating for your family, and how exactly did those experiences contribute to your determination to pursue a career in educational equity?
Right. And my internet is a little shaky sometimes, so I'll just
Mhm.
note that. But I heard most of the question, which I believe was your first one that you shared. I can get into a little bit of my personal background here. Like I mentioned, I was born and raised in San Francisco, but my parents were immigrants from China. They came to the United States in the 1980s, and they were mostly factory workers in China. And when they came to the United States, my dad worked in restaurant and food industries. My mom worked in a bakery on and off, but it was definitely a very difficult experience growing up, being working class, immigrant family. I would say there was honestly lots and lots of moments growing up where even from a very young age, needing to or wanting to help my parents and help people in my family to access different resources, different information about really basic needs. If I had to just give one anecdote of how things that are very straightforward for English speakers, people who are born in the United States, become very complicated when you face language barriers, when there are additional sort of access needs related. So I can remember in middle school going to with my dad to renew his driver's license, and the entire experience was extremely difficult because once we were there, there was a lot of back and forth and a lot of questioning from different officials, and needing to both translate in the moment and also when there was questions that my parents would have or things that they would want to know, also making sure to put those forward as well. This goes on from there to things like doctor's appointments, like going with my parents, and when a doctor prescribes medicine or treatment, often they, because of language barrier, they won't actually explain what they're prescribing or what they are calling for. And they don't really put the patient first in the scenarios. And a lot of my experience as a kid was often wanting to and trying to make sure that my parents or whoever I was with had all the information that they should have to make an informed decision, to make the best decision for their situation. So moments like that where San Francisco, we're a very lucky place in terms of having often language access and translation services, but also acknowledging that even in a city like ours that really prides itself on these kinds of policies, that firsthand experience tells that it's often not sufficient, right? That even kind of bare minimum or Google Translate or whatever was available was still not enough.
So I wanted to go into the second question, which is also very related to this first one, basically inquiring about your experiences. So in your Los Angeles Times op-ed, you mentioned applying for affordable housing through Asian American nonprofits and assisting your parents with accessing COVID-19 vaccines. So these are very firsthand experiences, and you might have faced certain systemic barriers when you were progressing through them. So what exactly did you go through those processes, and how did it influence like what you wanted to change in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. And in the op-ed, I shared these examples because similar to affirmative action in college admissions, these policies such as, affordable housing or these targeted outreach practices from Asian American nonprofits, all of these policies are really trying to address existing barriers and trying to make sure that people are able to address their basic needs, whether that is about housing or whether it is about access to education, but also at the same time knowing that they are not the complete picture. And when I talk about the importance of affirmative action, I really am trying to distinguish how it is very important to have these policies that expand who is being served and who is benefiting from the distribution of resources or opportunities, and knowing that there's also so much more that we can do. So in the case of affordable housing in San Francisco and across the country, we see that we're in a housing crisis, and my parents had been living for a very long time in an apartment and paying rent, and seeing just how the increases and the lack of affordability for most market rate housing was really affecting my parents, right? And we can see too how just the cost of living is so high, and the lack of security and social security safety nets can really impact people, like all people, to be honest. We can see how even inflation is really making everyday living more and more difficult. And so knowing that there are some resources available to try to help people who are impacted the most. So my parents being seniors and being people of color in this city who have been here for years and years. And I knew that I wanted to try to make sure that they were able to stay in this city that they had called their home for longer than they had lived in China, right? They've been here for so long. They're a part of this community. And applying for affordable housing was one of those experiences where at the same time as feeling very glad that these policies are in place and that there are these sorts of targeted policies, even set-asides, to try to make sure that people who have been here for a long time are able to stay here. Also knowing that it's not enough, right? That in the larger scheme of the housing crisis, that the creation of affordable housing can't keep up with all the need that there is. And when I talk about affirmative action in higher education, we know that it was never meant to be a panacea, right? We see how student debt or even the lack of seats available for students that want to pursue higher education are not available. And as we know that it's important to have these policies in admissions to make sure that people have a fair shot, that they get a chance to, access these opportunities, that it's also not enough, right? That in my state, California, in the University of California system, when you think about all of the our largest public university network, that we haven't had a UC campus in almost 10 years, that they're, and just thinking about population growth, how are we thinking about the investments we're making in order to keep up with the demand of people who want to access college? So all of these different pieces shape how I think about systemic issues, that there is this immediate need, and that the idea of, we need to have Band-Aid solutions because people are bleeding right now. And at the same time, we also need to get to the root source of why are people getting hurt. So thinking about both how we can address root causes and change our systems, and at the same time, meet the needs of people who are suffering right now.
So you've experienced an incredible evolution. You were once an individual that was experiencing these systemic issues, and now you're at the forefront of change with Chinese for Affirmative Action. So I was just wondering, what are the current strategic goals for CAA? What are you attempting to do right now, and what are your current projects?
Yeah, absolutely. I will just outline CAA's overall strategic plan. We have multiple prongs of this. We intend to continue to first grow and strengthen Chinese progressive voice across generations and language groups. A lot of our efforts are both in language and in language as in Chinese dialects, and also in English communications and social media networks. And we really try to be a very strong voice in a lot of these spaces. And that is one of our main prongs of work. And then second, to really remove barriers and create opportunities for low-income, limited English-speaking immigrants, both through policy advocacy and through our direct services and civic engagement work. So naming a couple of our key strategies that we use, both in addressing needs at various levels. So when I name direct services and civic engagement, again, trying to meet the needs of people where they are right now, and learning from and gaining perspective on what is really needed for policy advocacy through our civic engagement and direct services, letting our policy advocacy be driven by the experiences of those most impacted. And also more generally, we are looking to continue to foster and build on the Asian American progressive social justice movement. We see a lot of opportunities for supporting individuals, organizations, whether that is other growing nonprofits or partners that are interested in getting more involved, or smaller groups of activated people, and trying to build this movement and bring more people along. That's really some of the big picture goals that CAA is trying to move towards. But I can also name too, for education equity, our work that at the same time as we are seeing how the, for example, most recent decision on affirmative action from the Supreme Court will definitely change a lot of the landscape of how we work on higher education admissions. We also see that this is just one battlefront, if you will, for what is a kind of multi-pronged, and has been a multi-pronged attack from conservatives on racial diversity in higher education, and whether that is about curriculum or about classroom censorship, teaching of ethnic studies, about book bans, about the attacks on teachers who teach critical race theory or even teach diverse curriculum, to things like admissions in college, but even diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, that there's a lot of ways in which we know that we have to continue to fight these battles in a lot of different areas, and that this is just one part of that conversation. And at the same time, knowing that we also need to be proactive in trying to expand opportunities for students who have been historically marginalized. So when I say CAA tries to remove barriers and expand opportunities, that applies to education equity as well, that we see the need to proactively remove barriers such as the unfair use of the SAT or ACT for admissions or consideration of scholarships. We see how these tests are often more predictors of family wealth than they are of actual preparation for college and ability to succeed in college. We see that as an unnecessary barrier for so many students that want to access education. And in addition to removing barriers, right, we want to see expanded opportunities. So what that calls for from further investment from local and state governments for really robust educational opportunities. And at CAA, that can mean many different things, but one of our upcoming initiatives is on multilingual education and how we see this need for investment in opportunities for students to learn a different language and the importance of that being held at the same time as we think about English learner education. So often those are addressed separately, but really we see them as one and the same, that for native English speakers to learn other languages and for non-English speakers to learn English, that we need to treat these ideas in tandem, and that people are bringing their abilities and their skills and assets to the classroom, whether they are English speakers or non-English speakers. And how do we think about creating a truly inclusive learning environment that's multicultural, multilingual, as one, I think, policy idea that we have long sort of advanced.
So I'm very glad that you mentioned CAA's commitment to diversity and especially the work with affirmative action, especially in light of like the political atmosphere as of late. So going into our next question that is linked to affirmative action, one student was wondering, what was your personal reaction upon hearing that Supreme Court decision? Because obviously you've been involved in affirmative action advocacy for a long time. You said that it was very pivotal and for your education and for giving you opportunities. So what was your initial reaction, and what do you think are currently the steps to move forward from this decision?
Right, absolutely. And my involvement with this case goes back since 2018, when I was an undergrad college student at Harvard myself. I've been involved with this case now for 5 years, over the course of being a student to being an advocate to the current position that I am in now, and having had a very deep level involvement at all levels. So just noting here that my first interaction with this case was in providing testimony as a student to the importance of affirmative action in my own experience. And through that, actually sitting through and reading through the case materials, whether it was at the federal or the district court level, and getting at the heart of what this case was about, which was essentially driving a wedge between communities of color, led by a conservative activist, Ed Bloom, and using the cover of Asian Americans to essentially drive his continuing attack on the civil rights of communities of color. And I would still recommend people to keep a sharp eye on what he has worked on and what he continues to work on, whether that has been in the past gutting the Voting Rights Act and the ability for communities of color to be enfranchised to vote, to what he is turning to now, and whether that has been at the college or the high school level, really taking a sharp eye to where he's coming from and what his ultimate goals are, which are not aligned with what organizations like CAA and people like myself see as actual issues that Asian American students are facing. So all of that to say, having been very much steeped in the case as it has advanced through the courts to the Supreme Court, I was disappointed, angry, frustrated, but not surprised. I think that we knew that if the Supreme Court had taken the facts of the case, the history of this country, and its own precedent over the last 40 years into logical consideration, then our case would have prevailed. And that the use of race in college admissions as a factor among many would have continued to have been affirmed. And knowing that we have a current Supreme Court that does not care about history, facts, or its own precedent. So part of the frustrating piece of how I felt after the decision is that there isn't much that most people can do to influence the Supreme Court unless they have billions of dollars and they can buy out. Well, we can leave it at that. People can look up Justice Clarence Thomas's current legal, his current features in the news around who can influence Supreme Court justices. But most people are not able to influence their decision at any level. And so what a lot of advocates are turning to and moving towards at this moment is thinking about what the implementation of this decision will look like. So the Department of Education releases guidance for colleges and universities, and the actual work from here is very much at the local and the state level of how colleges actually respond to this. And we really see this as two-pronged. For one, there is a lot that colleges and universities can still do, and in fact, should be investing more in, given this decision. That even before this decision came out, there were steps that college administration could take to try to expand the diversity of their recruitment pool, to build recruitment pipelines, to consider how they are doing outreach for applicants to their school, to expand the financial aid packages for example, first-generation college students that are more often students of color, and to encourage matriculation for the students that apply and are ultimately accepted. There is nothing in the case that says they cannot review the data of the students that they are recruiting or accepting every year, and to think about where those gaps are. They can take lots of different policy changes, including things like guaranteed admissions from public high schools. So, for example, Texas's 10% plan, or thinking about getting rid of the SAT and ACT as a barrier to their admissions. There are lots of schools that have been creative. And for example, in states like Michigan and California that have had affirmative action bans at the state level, colleges have tried lots of different things to try to, and knowing the frustration that there aren't really race neutral policies that can achieve the same goals as a race conscious policy, but at the same time knowing that that doesn't mean that we shouldn't, be trying to find alternatives at the same time. And knowing that there's lots more that colleges and universities can do, could have been doing since before the decision, and if anything, more reason to start doing now. And then when I say it's two-pronged, one is what the colleges and universities and local and state governments can be encouraging, can be funding, can be supporting. And the other part of this is also at the student and parent level. I think that student parents and families, that there's a lot that needs to be done even in the K through 12 space, that there is all of the supports and the resources needed in that space, or the resources information, so that people are even able to get to the college application phase. That knowing that college application is just sort of one part of our whole education system, and that given how contentious this case has been, there's a lot of misinformation out there about how students can and should navigate different educational opportunities that are available to them, and wanting to make sure that people know at the end of all this that they should still feel empowered to be authentically themselves, that they can still write about, and I'll note here, right, that they can still write about their racial or ethnic background in their college admissions material. They should still feel free to write about things that are important to them, experiences, values, perspectives that they have. And that even if at this current piece around college admissions, that universities are scrambling to figure out what this looks like in terms of evaluation, that there's so many parts of our life and so many parts after college admissions too that really highlight the importance of race conscious policy, of race conscious practices, and that affirmative action is still alive and well in private corporation spaces, in sort of company employment and hiring. And just noting here that this isn't, the end of the conversation in any way.
Thank you so much for your take on affirmative action and talking about all the work that you've done advocating for it. So we only have about 5 minutes left in the interview, so I thought I would go into a closing question. So obviously we're seeing a lot of backward progress, especially politically and in terms of educational policy. But I was wondering what you believe are the best forms of progress that you've seen, what policies that you're very proud of, the initiatives of CAA that you think will truly enact change. Is there anything you want to bring to light?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll bring a historic case because it is excellent timing. This year is the 10-year anniversary of the establishment of the City College of San Francisco's Chinatown North Beach campus. The City College of San Francisco is our local community college, and we have had a long history in fighting for the establishment of a campus within this community to meet the needs of our adult learners, whether that has been vocational training or English learning or acquiring advanced degrees across the board. And I name this because so much of this conversation around affirmative action misses the point in a couple different ways. One, that, for example, at our City College of San Francisco alone, there are more Asian American students served than in all of the Ivy League, right? And that really highlighting that elite exclusive admission is not the full picture of where our community members access education. And having graduated from Harvard myself, I have gone back to City College for free. It's also tuition free, right? For free learning opportunities, that learning happens at multiple stages, and that there's lots of ways to expand access in ways that don't adhere to what news media, what is most commonly understood, right? Around, intensely competitive, rejects 95% of people types of learning environments, and that isn't the world that we have to live in any way, and that there's a lot of other ways that we can advance learning and educational opportunities and resources for people. And I'm very proud also to name this establishment and the 10 years of continuing to advocate for resources for this campus, also because of how it was a community win, that this was something that students, activists, community members, organizations came forward to fight for, and that was an active campaign for multiple years to actually go from having scattered classrooms here and there for often classes that had wait lists and that were overcrowded, but were the only ones that are available, to turning that around to becoming an actual community hub, to actually being an investment. And in some ways, I would name it as affirmative action as well, in how the City College of San Francisco is supposed to serve all San Franciscans, and that affirmative actions, that positive steps needed to be taken to make sure that that promise was being fulfilled, because so many at the time Chinese American learners were being left out, and that the proactive steps to build this campus, to invest in accessibility, I would say is a form of affirmative action in its original conception, and that it's not about taking away campus space from other students. It's not about trying to take negative steps, but it's actually about making the investments and the positive changes to make sure that everyone has a seat at the table, has access to what is being promised. So the vision of education, I think, as a public good, as a resource for all, I think is much clearer often in community college spaces, and is a very different story than what is told. I think that what is politically popular to discuss is often tension, competition, fighting, lack of resources, scarcity, fear, paranoia, all these things that generate clicks, generate likes. But at the end of the day, I think people also can think about the bigger picture. What are the needs that community members have that are being filled, and what is really exciting about how we're getting to those goals?
Thank you so much, Sally. This was a great note to end the interview off on. And I just wanted to thank you so much for agreeing to participate in this interview and answering the many questions that were asked nationwide. I'm very inspired by your work, since I'm trying to get into educational equity advocacy myself. And I'm sure all the other students and adults and community members that are watching this are also very inspired as well. So I wanted to thank you again. And if you have any closing remarks, if you want to share any media sources, resources from CAA, you can also do that.
I will share this really quick here, but a great reference for students, advocates, trying to figure out what's next after affirmative action. Feel free to take a look. I just shared our open letter to presidents and trustees of colleges and universities in the United States that outlines some of CAA's top points for how to continue, for colleges to continue to expand opportunity and show their commitment towards social justice. And folks can sign this petition, but more importantly, they can take this to their local schools and universities, your alumni organizations, your student organizations, to hold your institutions accountable to what you want to see. And of course, things will be different at different colleges, but if you're looking for ideas, this is a good place to start for how you can call for specific changes at your local institutions in response to this decision.
Yeah, of course. I'll link this petition in with the YouTube video in the description and also on the website.